Welcome to Breaking Battlegrounds. I'm your host, Chuck Warren, with my co-host, Sam Stone. Today, our first guest is Congressman Dusty Johnson from the great state of South Dakota. Dusty's one of our favorite members, and he is also now running for governor in South Dakota with a primary on June 2nd. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, in the news, as all things Trump world every day, he dominates when you wake up in the morning. He's in China. They're talking about a lot of things. Of course, China hits on Taiwan, which is all the national press wants to focus about. But, you know, we got political prisoners. We have rare earth minerals, things of that nature. You are on the select committee on China. What do you hope is achieved at this summit?
I think we want some progress on an understanding of what the long-term trade relationship between the two countries really should be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the first term the president cut, at the time it was a pretty highly regarded deal with China, and yet China didn't really make good on hardly any of those commitments. I mean, they did. There were a number of really important structural reforms they made. Those aren't sexy. Those don't get a lot of attention. But those were helpful. If I'm being honest, I don't think the Biden administration did a very good job of executing that agreement and holding the Chinese feet to the fire. But I do think we need some predictability around what do these two great power relationships look like. And there are some areas where we need to de-risk, but we're going to be better positioned to de-risk if we know what is the nature of how many soybeans is China going to buy? And I do think Donald Trump understands the nature of China threat and the nature of the China opportunity. I mean, he not unlike Nixon going to China, I think could make a big geopolitical gain here if he can stick the landing.
How many days are they supposed to be there?
You know, of course, they're off calendar from us, right? So 3, I think, is the answer.
There's an article we have talked about quite a bit on this show about rare earth minerals. And, you know, Semaphore has a great piece on this today and says that the Trump administration is keenly aware of the rare earth's Achilles heel, and that Gracelyn Bascaran of Center for Strategic International Studies said Trump's pushing the boldest domestic industrial policy in modern history. I don't think people realize how behind we were on this rare earth mineral game.
And still are.
What would you tell our audience? What has happened? Why are we so behind? And why is it important that we get a hold of it?
We're so far behind because it's almost impossible to do big projects in this country anymore. We've talked about siting and permitting on y'all's show before, but nowhere is it felt more acutely and more dangerously than in rare earth minerals. I mean, rare earth minerals are not rare at all.
Right.
They're almost everywhere. They're just in very low quantities. And so you need big mining operations to be able to get a critical mass of these critical minerals. And we don't like to site mines in this country anymore. We make it really hard to build highways. We make it really hard to build transmission lines. And boy, oh boy, do we make it really hard to build mines. And as a result, we've fallen further and further behind. China, of course, has turned the knob too far the other way. They just don't care at all about protecting land use or property rights or the environment. You know, there is a Goldilocks spot there. We have an almost uniquely American problem in getting big projects done. And if we don't address that, and soon, it is going to really complicate the next century being an American century.
Congressman, one of the difficulties, I think, in the public argument here is it's hard to quantify how much worse China is environmentally when they do a mine or they do build a power plant or whatever. I keep thinking if there was a way to do that, it would open a lot of people's eyes, because they talk about one world, one planet, but they don't act like that in the environmental movement.
Yeah, they are an insanely bad environmental actor. I want to live in a world where what you said is true, which if we can just quantify it, we can just bring more data to bear on why America needs to be back in the building big projects business, that this will all happen. My observation is that the far populist right and the far populist left are not all that vulnerable to data-driven argument.
You're correct, sir.
That's a good way to put it.
You are correct, sir.
Yeah, and so saying, oh, well, 2032, the price of this type of battery technology will be 17% less, and that will add more affordability to the average American household. I don't know. That just sounds like the adults in a Peanuts cartoon.
Well, I admit I'm a nerd, so that sounds great to me.
Yeah. No, and by the way, President Trump is exactly right on this issue. I mean, and of course, he does have a special amount of currency with the American far right. I think he knows how to talk populist to them. And I think he is uniquely almost able to get heads nodding when he talks about why America can't get shut out of the critical minerals game. And so I mean, he's a singularly powerful political figure. That doesn't mean he's perfect. Obviously, he's not. But I do think he gives us a chance to try to bring aboard some of the American populist right that otherwise is not all that interested in large projects.
Well, I think what's interesting about President Trump, and we've discussed this a lot on the show, while he's not perfect, he is doing something I've not seen a president do in a while. And please correct me if I'm wrong here. He seems to be focusing on things that will make America more secure 10, 20 years, from the Trump accounts for kids, from this critical mineral to industrial geopolitical realignment. I don't think people realize, if he's successful at these things, how much secure America is going to be 10, 20, 30 years from now. Am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong. I mean, I think I don't think it's that he sat down and he wrote some big treatise of
No.
what is the Trumpian worldview and how do I try to bring about an ownership society and, multi-generational change. I just think at his core, instinctively, he's a builder.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point.
He likes new things. He likes to build big things. And it just so happens that that is very in alignment with what America needs to continue American exceptionalism into the next century. And so, I mean, I think it's a really good fit for the moment.
Well, a moment we've needed for a while. I mean, what led to I want to move on to a different subject here, but I want to go back to this for 1 minute regarding these critical minerals. What led to our decline here? Was it just all the regulations popping up in the 70s and 80s that we just stopped mining and building new mines? What led to this? Because it's also not only that. We had to train a new generation of rare earth engineers. You had to build processing factories.
Sue and settle in publicly funded environmental lawsuits.
Is that when it all started, Congressman?
Yeah, I do think it is litigation. And it is how well the environmental lobby has been able to weaponize NEPA. Not just NEPA, but NEPA is a pretty good poster child to start with. And so the well-intentioned environmental laws, it was that the far left really started to figure out in the 70s and perfected it by the 90s and how to use these laws to slow down projects. And they knew that time kills all deals. And investors simply can't have billions of dollars just hanging out on a project that's never going to come to fruition. And unfortunately, there are forces on the American far right that have also figured out how to weaponize these environmental regulations.
Right.
It is really, really hard to get these big projects done on the kind of timeline that the market that the market's willing to bear.
Let's switch quickly here to gas prices. So what's gas, about $4.20 a gallon right now in South Dakota for unleaded?
That's probably about right. Although, I mean, I've seen that kind of price. It's been lower than that in Sioux Falls, our largest city. But if you get in the outlying areas, that's a very typical number.
And diesel's $1 more. And I imagine in South Dakota you have lots of diesel trucks, and there's lots of distances to drive in South Dakota, right? What do you think Congress should be doing to help reduce the gas prices right now as we have the Iran war going on, various things going on around the world? What can you do to help the consumer lower these gas prices?
I would like us to further American energy dominance by de-risking a little bit more, insulating us a little bit more from the Middle East. I mean, clearly there's like a global clearing price for oil products. No country can completely wall themselves off from those market forces, and yet relying more on domestic energy, including ethanol, biofuels, I think has an important role to play. Yesterday, on a strong bipartisan vote, the House passed out E15. That's not a mandate. That allows consumers at the pump to buy and allows gas station owners to sell E15 year round. E15 is about 40 or 50 cents a gallon cheaper than regular unleaded. That is a big deal. And again, I think means that we're able to refocus more on what's going on in South Dakota cornfields rather than Iranian oil fields.
How do we? One of the difficulties, obviously, with Trump's agenda is that it seems to jump all over the globe. We had this huge, I'm not even sure what to call Venezuela at this point. It wasn't a war. It was, a capturing of a rogue leader. We're continuing to work with them. How long before we start truly bringing their oil resources online into the world market?
Yeah, that happened very quickly. I don't have we got a lot of briefings very early after that incursion, but I'm not aware of how much has recently come online, but very quickly, like within 3 weeks, they had a fair amount of oil. And there was some idea that, oh, this is just being sold to Americans and it's a sweetheart deal. That's all balderdash. It went onto the market. They were using the kind of standard oil brokers that move these large quantity of oil around anyway. Now, a lot of it was purchased by Americans because that made a lot more sense. The invisible hand of the market wanted to bring that South America oil to bear in North American marketplaces. They really let their infrastructure in Venezuela diminish. If we're going to up substantially that amount of oil that will come into the marketplace, it's going to need some pretty substantial investment into infrastructure.
We're with Congressman Dusty Johnson here, and he's member of Congress, and you can follow him on X at Rep. Dusty Johnson. He is also running for governor of South Dakota, which has a primary on June 2nd. The polling shows he's up double digits. Congressman, how can they follow your campaign in South Dakota?
At Dusty Johnson on most all of your platforms, not TikTok because that is just Chinese malware, but everything else at Dusty Johnson.
This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be back in a minute with Dusty Johnson. Thank you. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. I'm your host, Chuck Warren, with my co-host, Sam Stone. We're with us still, Congressman Dusty Johnson from South Dakota. He's also running for governor in South Dakota, where he is leading by double digits. And he's one of the few members of Congress that uses the word balderdash. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Yes, thank you.
Sam, go ahead.
All right, folks. Private student loan debt in the U.S. now totals $300 billion. $45 billion of that is distressed. Why refi? Refinance is distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They provide you with a custom payment based on your ability to pay. It's not a debt settlement company. Why Refi works with each borrower individually, tailoring each loan to each borrower's specific situation. You will not be calling a faceless call center. Why Refi can reduce your monthly payment and guarantees interest rates under 6%, ensuring affordability and financial relief, and they do not care what your credit score is. So go to YREFI, that's YREFY.com today, or give them a call at 888-YREFI-85 and tell them Chuck and Sam sent you.
Great. So, Congressman Johnson, 21% of all jobs in South Dakota are agriculture. It's nearly 130,000 jobs. As governor, what can you do to help support those jobs and the continued growth of the agricultural industry?
Well, when I talk to producers, their biggest beef are input costs. The prices, they're good on the cattle side, but they're actually not terrible on the row crop side. What's terrible is these input costs are just eating them alive. They can make money on corn at $4.27 a bushel if their input costs are manageable. That's one of the reasons I'm running. We had two of the guys I'm running against, Speaker of the House John Hanson, Governor Larry Roden. They worked together to raise the state and local sales taxes 3 different times. That is going to make the price of almost everything in South Dakota more expensive. It's amazing to me in a conservative state that they've gotten away with that.
Why? What was their reasoning for raising it 3 times?
Well, of the 3, 2 of them were ostensibly targeted toward property tax relief. Property tax, there has been a bit of a crisis in property taxes in South Dakota, but most of that increase comes about in the third sales tax, where they give cities the ability to raise an extra 1 penny. That's a pretty big leap. Cities right now are only allowed 2 pennies in South Dakota, an extra third penny for special projects. I mean, listen, I think this was a big mistake, given affordability is the biggest problem facing most South Dakotans. Raising that sales tax not once, not twice, but potentially 3 times if cities opt in, that was a big miscalculation.
I just looked something up. It's interesting. So, South Dakota does $32 billion annually in agriculture. Okay. Quiz for you. Guess how many countries do that much in the world?
I wouldn't have any idea, but I will guess 39.
15 to 20 countries.
Yeah.
That is how big of a producer South Dakota
That's
is.
enormous.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
They need to go take that to Washington. Anyway, Sam, go ahead.
Congressman, your first job in elected office was on the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission, talking about affordability. I tend to think politicians who start out their careers on those kind of, whether it's a municipal government or that kind of board or commission, you get real focused on delivering results and not talking points. How much right now do we need to focus on bringing overall energy costs down to increase production, both for our farm sector, agriculture, every part of the economy?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And it comes back to the issue we talked about, which is if you can't build anything in this country, you're simply not going to be able to have affordable utility rates. I mean, if we're going to bring rates down, I mean, we know that in the next 20 years, we're going to need a lot more electricity than we've got. China every other year adds as much electric capacity as we have in total in this country.
Jeez.
And you cannot have prosperity and you cannot be competitive if you don't have affordable energy, period.
No.
And so we've got to figure out how to build a few more power plants in the right places and have transmission lines to get that power to where we need it. And that will help long-term keep rates affordable.
I'm curious about your position on data centers, because I know there's a lot of pushback on them, but Chuck and I have talked about this. I view this as an existential issue for the country going forward. Whoever controls the information, who has the computing power, is going to dominate the next century. It has to be us, because if it's China, we're looking at a very scary world.
What you said is near gospel. You're exactly right. And it's amazing to me that this has gotten as controversial in this country as it has. America won, and our allies won the battle for the design of Web 1.0. We won the battle for the design of Web 2.0. And as a result, those systems, those platforms are really based on American values. If we let China win the battle for AI, that is going to be incredibly bad news for those of us, who love freedom, openness, transparency, and other Western values. I mean, really, really bad news. And the idea that, well, China can just build the data centers, really, we're going to route all of this American data through Chinese data centers and then let them give us the answers back. This is so dumb, it is hard to comprehend. That does not mean that every cornfield is the right place to put a data center. But Americans are smart enough to be able to figure out the right project in the right place with the right protections. I rolled out my plan, the Data Centers Done Right initiative, which would absolutely strike the right balance there. North Dakota, my neighbor to the north, they've been as welcoming data centers as any state in the union in the last 3 years. They have seen their electric rates go down in the last 3 years and go down more than any other state's electric rates have gone down. So, yeah.
Have any other states' electric rates gone down? That's an amazing story. And you don't hear it.
It is an amazing story. And of course, it makes sense. I mean, all of this stuff, all of this, the electric infrastructure we need is expensive. It's a lot less expensive if the data center guys are paying for half of it,
Right.
rather than us, the ratepayers, paying for all of it. And the fact that there are folks who just don't get that is really frustrating.
So you had an illegal immigrant in 22 they caught in South Dakota with enough Chinese fentanyl to kill 500,000 people, and he was convicted this week. How bad is the drug crisis in South Dakota, and what's your plan?
It is really bad, although I wouldn't say that it is a South Dakota problem so much as it is an American problem. We do, of course, have drug overdose deaths in South Dakota, far too many. And yet on a per capita basis, it is a little smaller than what you would see nationally if you're combining fentanyl and meth. Meth's a little bit bigger problem in South Dakota than it is in much of the rest of the country. We're thankfully lagging a little behind on fentanyl deaths and fentanyl addiction, although that is coming up pretty rapidly. What we need is number one, we need to continue to keep the southern border sealed. We've done a really good job. I've been proud to be a part of that winning team. We need better investments in drug addiction in this country. We do a relatively poor job of that, I think. But we also need to make sure we're back in law enforcement and that we have court and probation and parole systems that work. This is another problem I have with the current governor. We have the third worst recidivism rate in America in South Dakota. That wasn't true 5 years ago, it wasn't true 10 years ago, but half of South Dakotans that we let out of prison go on to commit another crime within 3 years. 50%.
That's insane. That is insane.
Yeah, that's not good at all. Well, Congressman, we always appreciate having you on the show. You got about 10 seconds left. Where do people find you? How can they follow you on the campaign?
At Dusty Johnson on all of the platforms, and it's going to be a wild and woolly next couple of weeks. And thank goodness in our system, the voters get to decide. And so if you're a South Dakotan, give Dusty Johnson a look.
Dusty Johnson, thanks a million. This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Our next guest up today, Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review and the author of Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against the Progressives' War on Fun. His latest book, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence, comes out this coming Tuesday, May 19th. You're definitely going to want to check that out. Important writing. Absolutely. Noah Rothman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Dear listeners, too, for the first 5 people who reply to our post about this book on Facebook this weekend, we'll send you a free copy of the book. So just DM us and give us your address, and we'll send it your way. Before we start talking about this great book, and thank you for sending us a copy, the New York Times is being sued by Israel, which makes me happy in many ways. Can you explain to our audience what is going on regarding the New York Times and the report that came out about the atrocities on 10/7?
Well, on the atrocities on 10/7. Well, so there was a review, a series of interviews, 430 survivors, roughly, 10,000 images, 1,800 hours of video footage that were analyzed by dozens of analysts with this nonprofit and Israeli women's group, independent NGO, which came out with this very sprawling report, and it is very difficult read. If you actually dig into the accusations that are in there, they are almost unspeakable. Literally, it's very difficult to describe the violations that occurred, save for the fact that individuals were tortured, were raped, were executed while they were being raped, had their extremities dismembered, family members were forced to perform sexual acts on one another before they were killed, etc., so forth. The gravity of the inhumanity, the pure savagery that was unleashed there was muted a little bit by the publication about 48 hours prior of not a report, but an opinion piece in the New York Times, the purpose of which was to convey to its readers that, yeah, there are some horrors that were meted out on October 7th, but the Israeli conduct since has been as horrible, if not more horrible, as brutal, as savage, as inhumane. So who are we to render any moral judgments about what's going on over there?
Well, in that piece, it clearly appeared that they had time, knowledge that this report was coming out. And Nicholas Kristof, who used to be a good journalist, has fallen down this rabbit hole. How did someone like him end up where he is now? I know that's speculation, but it's insane to watch the degradation of the left on this issue.
Yeah, it's scary. I can't delve into Mr. Kristof's psychology. What you can say that I think is fair is that there is a certain element on the left that has subordinated elementary discretion and really basic professional discipline to retail lurid claims about Israel. And by virtue of the degree to which Israel is a Jewish state, the Jewish people and the diaspora more broadly. The allegations in that 3,000-word piece are sprawling. They are many. The sourcing that they used is pretty dubious. A lot of it comes from this HR Monitor Euromed, which has ties to Hamas, has been cited by Israeli justice officials for their ties to Hamas, has accused Israel of fantastical things like mass field or executions and organ harvesting, none of which have been substantiated. The victims with whom he spoke, alleged victims, many of whom are not named, some that are, have again retailed really fantastical and lurid claims about Israel in the past that have not been substantiated. One of the named sources, one of the few named sources, alleged at one point that his extremities were literally exploding when he was in Israeli custody. Again, unverified. And then there's this claim about systematic dog rape, in which prisoners are subjected to penetration by canines on command.
I thought Batya Ungar-Sargon had the best tweet on that. This is an IQ test, and a lot of you are fake.
It kind of is.
It's true.
Yeah. It's not independently verifiable. Medical journals can't back up the claim. Independent experts can't back up the claim. So you wonder what the New York Times was thinking here when it subordinated its really rigorous fact-checking operation. I've been through it. When they want to nail you down on something, when they even have the slightest suspicion that you haven't thoroughly supported a claim that you're making, they'll go at you really hard and end up tightening up pieces and making them stronger in the process, even if their claims are not as strong or as emotionally gratifying as they once were. They didn't do that in this case. And they didn't do that probably for a lot of really sordid reasons.
Right.
Among them, the fact that their audience really wants to consume the most unbelievable, the more unbelievable, the better. The claims against Israel, and the notion being that they are as capable of and guilty of the atrocities that they are supposedly seeking remedy for by attempting to extirpate Hamas from the Gaza Strip, render that whole enterprise suspect, because they really are as guilty and as sordid as any other Palestinian faction, terrorist or otherwise.
Yeah, they're just trying to justify it. It's unbelievable. They really want to whitewash 10/7. It's incredible.
And the difference is, I mean, even if you, I'm sorry to filibuster, but even if you want to withhold judgment about these claims, you can take heart in the fact that Israeli society, like the U.S., is a society with an open, transparent, and independent judiciary that adjudicates violations of its law. Abuse claims like these are a violation of Israeli law.
I'm sorry, Noah, I have to cut you off. We're going to break. We're coming right back with more of Noah Rothman, and we'll talk about his latest book, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence, when Breaking Battlegrounds comes back. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Continuing on now with Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review. His latest book, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence, comes out this Tuesday, May 19th. Follow him on X at Noah C. Rothman.
Jeremy, go ahead and cue that spot, please. This is from Seinfeld.
Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
Noah, I feel like that is how the left views violence on their side. That when they do political violence, it's free speech. When the right does it, it's a form of violence. And they just don't seem to be honest that they have a problem. It doesn't mean there's not violence on the right. But as your book points out, there is a litany, a history of violence on the left. Why are they unable to be honest about this?
It's a good question. Why? I think it's an honest misconception on their part. I mean, you and I are bombarded regularly, and we're skeptical of it, but we're bombarded regularly with the notion that the American right is the source of domestic political violence in this country, almost prohibitively so. And we hear that all the time. We hear about it especially in the immediate aftermath of an obvious or even confirmed act of politically motivated left-wing violence. And there have been so many recently. Shootings, targeted assassinations, attacks on ICE and CBP facilities, the sustained looting and burning of American cities. All the time we hear, well, you compartmentalize that.
Well,
because it's the right that's really violent.
I want to add to that, too, that a lot of times when there is an attack, supposed attack by the right, it turns out to have been a left-wing hoax.
There's some of that as well. But that's not to say that the right does not have its own violent pathologies.
Sure.
This book is very clear-eyed about that.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Sam and I have been on this, and we're conservative, but January 6th was intolerable. I don't like the people being pardoned on it. I don't know what your view, I just don't like it. But, let's be honest about it. And I don't think they're well-meaning. That's my problem with it. I don't think they're well-meaning. They don't want to recognize the facts. The murder in New York of the healthcare executive, the assassination attempts. I mean, they're not even honest about who killed JFK or Robert Kennedy.
Right. Well, yeah, and this the final chapter of this book is on the degree to which, right-wing violence in this country manifested in forms that were used to be pretty familiar to us: abortion bombings, the militia movement, the sovereign citizens movement, sort of stuff that was very prominent in the 80s and 90s. We've seen, and we still see some of that. The Gretchen Whitmer attempt, the kidnapping attempt, was much more militia-y, sovereign citizen flavored style violence.
Right.
What we have begun to see is a lot more left-wing style attacks from the American right using black bloc tactics, mob violence, affinity groups, as were deployed in Charlottesville, the sort of stuff that was conventionally anarchistic violent extremism, which is the FBI's term of art for captures most left-wing political violence. And it mirrors in many ways what I talk about in this book, the 125 years or so that is peppered with just about every 50 years waves of anarchistic and socialistic violence. We experienced it in the 1910s, 1920s, 1970s, and 1980s, 2010s rather, and 2020s. It's not an obscure history. It's a suppressed history. And I describe why in this book and explain why it's suppressed through misclassified and misapplied data sets that purport to create statistical evidence that demonstrates that the right is prohibitively violent. It is through an academic culture in which researchers face literal intimidation campaigns, as described by a document that I explore in the book. There's a excerpt from the book on National Review right now. It's published in the latest issue, in which I go into that document, in which it describes smear campaigns, social isolation campaigns, the threat of actual violence in reprisal for researchers who dig into this sort of situation, to say nothing of the fact that a lot of the people who research left-wing violent extremism themselves and create these databases are participants in these movements themselves.
Right.
Yes.
And a media culture that describes left-wing political violence as a quote-unquote myth. The left has spent decades telling itself it doesn't have a violence problem. This book indicts that fantasy. The right has its own pathologies, and it's clear about that. But the institutions in this country that are designed to deter and police domestic political violence don't need to be goaded into the noble act of policing the American right. They are constantly scanning the horizon for evidence of right-wing extremism. That's good. That's noble. But we're never going to get our hands around this problem by looking at only one side of it.
We're with Noah Rothman. His latest book is Blood in Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence. You can follow Noah on X at Noah C. Rothman. For those who can't spell, it's Rothman. Noah, so you had, the pardon system is another conversation for another day, but you've had Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Obama, and Biden have either pardoned or commuted sentences of left-wing violence. What has always been their justification for that?
The justification is in a myth that is created around them. The myth typically being that the system itself is the executor of violence, and the perpetrators of rank criminality, frankly, on the left, who happen to, or sometimes just gravitate to the left post facto because that's where their supporters are, and that's the ticket out of the problems they've created for themselves. There's a pantheon of left-wing heroes and martyrs who are criminals themselves, who are guilty of violence, who have nevertheless been rehabilitated by an activist class that jumps out in front of the cause and convinces American presidents in particular, but also governors, to mitigate, commute, pardon, and to rehabilitate them in accordance with what the left-wing activist narrative is. There's a whole chapter on this. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a cop killer who the freedom of whom became a cause celeb in the 1990s. Free Mumia was as ubiquitous as Got Milk or Free Tibet. It was a phenomenon, and it was predicated on a lot of faulty notions. Like, it's very difficult to find out what actually happened to Officer Daniel Faulkner on the night he was shot, unless you look into the story of Daniel Faulkner. If you look into Mumia Abu-Jamal, it's the task of a lifetime to sift through those narratives and find the truth in them. It's very hard to find. Well, the same with Assata Shakur, the same with Leonard Peltier, who Joe Biden pardoned. Mm-hmm. These people are within a pantheon of heroes on the left. They are guilty of criminal violence, and they are little more than bandits themselves. It's only after the fact that they've been branded revolutionary heroes and thus enjoy the glow of the Marxian revolution in retrospect.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, you brought up January 6th. Post January 6th, a handful of the people who were indicted in that tried to follow that path of, cause celeb, but it
Right.
never caught on the right.
No, no.
These folks,
Except with Donald Trump.
right,
Right.
They kind of catch on with him.
But by the way, he just breaks every rule. So I don't know if we can ever put him in those type of contexts for some reason. It just does. The rules don't apply.
But the difference is these folks, once they're pardoned or their sentence commuted or all this, they move into positions of real power and influence, often in the universities.
Well,
They're celebrated.
Was it Bill Ackerman, who's
Yeah.
Obama's buddy?
Yeah.
Weatherman Group? Wasn't that the case, Noah? He just became a celebrity?
Not Ackerman.
Bill Ayers. Bill
Bill
Ackerman's
Ayers.
an
Yeah.
Did he
investor.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Bill Ayers, was an unrepentant weather underground terrorist whose colleagues in that movement said he wanted to kill people. That was his objective, and he had a interview in which long ago he had fallen out of memory, but he had an unrepentant interview with the New York Times in which he defended his actions and defended the act of revolutionary violence in order to create the conditions for the ascension of the American left. That interview auspiciously came out in print in the New York Times on the morning of September 11th, 2001.
How much
which
of
is,
the
kind
fuel
of
for
cosmic.
this comes from that left-wing socialist academia? Because if you look at the history in your book, it almost ties exactly when this movement began to when Marx started promulgating his theories and they became popular here.
Well, yeah, the Marxian revolutionary aspect to it is part of it. For the most part, it is radicalism qua radicalism. It's radicalism for radicalism's sake. I touch on this in a chapter on the ideational affinities for violence, which very much have a lot of roots in academia and are cultivated in academia. Jason Burke, who's the author of a book about international Marxian terrorism in the late 1970s and early 1980s abroad, outside of the United States, so our work doesn't overlap at all. But he clarifies the extent to which the international Marxist left, which was very infatuated with Cuba, the Cuban Revolution, and Foucaultism, which was sort of the revolutionary ethic that emerged from the revolutionary experience in Cuba, they gravitated as the revolution sort of fell out of favor. It just became less of a animating feature because it was just a little less sexy than some of the newer ideologies on offer in the 1970s, among them pan-Arab nationalism in the form of Ba'athist socialism, which was what the Iraqi regime under Saddam Hussein and the Assad regime in Syria endorsed. And they evolved after the Iranian Revolution into outright Islamists. The Iranian Revolution incorporated Marxian elements into it too. You see monuments to Che and Castro throughout revolutionary Iran. And the Red-Green Alliance, such as it was, that brought the Iranian Revolution into power, was very much a real thing until the Reds were purged by the Greens. But it was nevertheless an amalgam of ideologies that have very little to do with each other ideologically. Their common thread was anti-Westernism and an endorsement of murderous political violence in order to achieve their political ends. And you do see that in the academy today. The academy today is very infatuated with radicalism for the sake of radicalism. It's an expression of your zeal for the cause. And too often, it is not favorable to, I think that's uncharitable to say, but certainly willing to make excuses for violence that is committed in the name of their ideas, because their ideas are just that powerful, that urgent, and that acute.
We're with Noah Rothman. He's a senior writer at the National Review. He is coming out with a new book on May 19th, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence. Again, if you visit our Facebook page this weekend, and our ad will be pimping this book, you first 5 people to DM us, we'll send you a free copy. You wrote a line here, which is the last question I want to ask regarding the book. You wrote, until we summon the courage to respond to political violence with consistency, the cycle will continue, and violent street action will become a feature of American public life. We should expect it. I agree wholeheartedly. What should be done? What should be our consistency on political violence?
Well, the first thing is that we should abhor it universally. That sounds really easy to say. It's a lot harder to do.
Apparently, yeah.
No, those who commit violence in our names have instantly lost the ability to claim our names, or that should be the case. If you're acting in service to my ideology and you're violent, you are no longer my ally. You are my enemy. That seems like something that should be endorsed by every rational thinking American, to say nothing of our elected leaders. And yet, to abandon one radical in the radicals' eyes is to abandon the whole cause. And the radicals are in control of our politics at the primary level. The very small but dedicated bands of absolutely committed activists can reshape our politics and are busily doing so. And they are increasingly creating conditions in which it's harder and harder for responsible American political actors to condemn violence, because they just don't want to alienate people on their side who are maybe a little bit sort of favorable to expressions of zeal like that. And yeah, I'm desperately terrified of what that unchecked, that phenomenon could unleash. Targeted assassinations we've already experienced. Directed riots we've already experienced. Orgiastic displays of anarchic savagery. We've seen it. And if that's the case, if that's our world, then you're going to have people make very rational conclusions about what they need to do to protect themselves and their families. Vigilantism. I'm sorry, continue.
Sorry, no, in the last decade, what scares me the most is in the last decade, the Democratic Party power establishment has stopped even acknowledging this exists also.
Right.
Well, they're afraid to antagonize their base, the activist class in their base. Not all their voters, frankly. We're talking about a very narrow portion of voters. They just happen to be the loudest. Leadership. And very overrepresented on social media.
Yeah, leadership is lacking. This is leadership. You have to stand up. People on the right do stand up to the violence on the right. You never see that anymore on the left.
You do, but it's rare. And you have folks like John Fetterman, who, if he were to go before his voters tomorrow, he would lose.
If he runs for president, he might have my vote. I mean, come on. The guy has been way out there and standing up for things that should be common sense to believe in. Noah Rothman, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, again, you can follow him at Noah C. Rothman or at National Review. Breaking Battlegrounds will be back on the air next week, but make sure, if you're not already, you download our podcast, go to breakingbattlegrounds.vote and get on there, because we got a lot of great content coming up this week and every week. See you next time.